Is Quentin Tarantino correct about biopic films? They are just big excuses for actors to win Oscars. It's a corrupted cinema. Fame-based biopics, I generally agree. There isn't anything inherently interesting or noteworthy about famous actors or singers. They're basically people who won a lottery. Because there's no genuine there they've become formulaic bores. The struggle, the success, the excess of success, the comeback, blah blah blah, and ultimately they're just vehicles for actors to do impressions that will impress award voters and studios' bankroll because famous people have enough name recognition to be. I think he's right, but you have to qualify the kind of biopic he's talking about to a narrow category of biopic. Is The Imitation Game a biopic or a true story about enigma with added focus to Alan Turing? Because I think Imitation is a good to very good movie in a way Bohemian Rhapsody, Michael, or the Eddie Redmayne Stephen Hawking film are not. Lincoln is essentially a biopic as it is all about one true person, but it's also not one because it's about the time as much as it is Abu. When considering what films are made for bad reasons, the easiest way to evaluate the situation is to look at the intention of the key creative people on the project, especially the director. Is the director here because it is an artistic passion project? If no, the project is very likely to be made for mostly questionable reasons. Some actors absolutely want to play a specific person though, and this is the big reason. At the end of the day, I definitely understand why, especially Acto. While most biopics are quite bad, there are also films like Mishima, A Life in 4 Chapters, Capote, and The End of the Tour. Incidentally, all three are about writers, which do something interesting with the genre. As always, Cutie's tendency for blanket statements makes him seem like a jackass, when all he had to do was say most biopics. I mean, the answer to pretty much any question, is Quentin Tarantino correct about X? Well, there's a grain of truth to it, which he has inflated to near bursting. There are of course lots of lousy ones, turned out as soulless product, but that's true of any genre. There are also plenty of top-tier directors who have the clout to take chances and make whatever film they want without interference from suits, and many of them have taken a stab at biopics. I don't see Nolan doing much Bo. I just feel like it's reductive to say all biopics are Oscar bait. Some of them are, but some are just fantastic movies. And it's not even a modern phenomenon either. In 1962 you had Lawrence of Arabia come out, ostensibly a biopic, and one of the greatest films of all time. Rightfully won Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Cinematography. But that same year, Anne Bancroft won Best Actress, and Patty Duke won Best Supporting Actress for The Miracle Worker, the Helen Keller biopic, which I think every genre has a gimmick that can get overplayed, and award bait tends to be the gimmick of biopics. That being said, some of the greatest films ever have been biopics, so it's a bit nuanced. I do feel like over time it has gotten worse, so I get what he's saying. This feels like a half-truth. Tarantino is generalizing biographical films as a whole. I don't think it's right to lump them all together. It would be like saying all gangster films are the same and excuses to glamorize crime, or that all westerns are the same and are made to be cheap flicks that appease Americans. It all depends on the individual films, the people who make them, why they make them, and how they make it. There are obviously plenty of biographical films that are just made by EXC. As a writer type, I think biopics tend to struggle from the off because true stories are not always logical or structurally sound, or even all that inherently interesting. You need a struggle in a story, some sort of challenge the hero have to overcome. Man drops phone and picks it up as in a story. Man drops phone in a field of angry goats starts to be. How will he get past the angry goats gives it a challenge, although fictionally you'd probably want to add time pressure. Maybe he's EXP? I imagine that films that take on an almost investigative journalistic narrative are worth the fuss, but for the most part, plain biopics are where actors get to flex for the Academy. I personally can't stand biopics. Almost no one's life is actually all that interesting. Especially all the biopics about musicians/artists. We get it, you were a talented outsider, you got famous, addicted to drugs, got over it, etc. It often is a safe choice, guaranteed audience. You can make absolute slop knowing it'll sell. It's my least fave genre tbh, something about biopics just feels so manufactured and forced. Tim Burton's Ed Wood is the only good exception I can think of. However, depending on how touchy the subject is, a biopic can actually be the opposite of safe. Something like the NWA biopic wasn't particularly safe, had a good amount of drama, and eventually lead to Suge Knight running over those two dudes. Then like most things, biopics can be lazy Oscar bait or genuinely interesting movies. Raging Bull, The Aviator, Goodfellas, and The Wolf of Wall Street are all biographies that largely focus on one famous person, and they're not formulaic bores. An interesting life story told by a masterful director can be a great movie. Quentin Tarantino loves to use his platform to put down others in the industry. To be honest, I wonder how much of these inflammatory comments he actually means versus he just exaggerates to get attention. I don't think they're trying to make cinema. I think it's just for the fans of famous singer X or Y. That's it. I think Tarantino is making a bigger deal out of this than it needs to be. Just because there are perceived lowbrow movies, it doesn't take away from other movies that may be accepted more by film elites. We can have both, and no, having music biopics is not ruining cinema expressionless face. Grow up. I kind of feel he's right, TBH. The best biopics for me are the ones that play with the form, or the ones that dig into one key part of a person's life. I think trying to portray an entire person's lived experience in 2 hours is just hard to do, without it just becoming a series of story beats we've all seen before. Cutie is one of those people that only ever sees the actor and not the character. When he put Pam Grier in Jackie Brown, he sees Pam, not Jackie. The character is just an extension of the actor's persona. This frees him as a writer-director, but also probably makes biopics boring. Not all biopics are the same. I have some simple prerequisites for a biopic. Having these doesn't automatically make the movie good, but it usually prevents it from being very bad at the very least. 1. Does the movie treat the subject somewhat objectively? It can have some bias, but it can't leave out warts that were essential to someone's life. Walk the Line shows Johnny Cash as an adulterer and a drug addict. It also shows him being a distant dad. Rocketman shows Elton John struggling with. Tarantino simply lives off his video store nerd with unmatched movie knowledge story. He can make movies, to some extent, but when talking about the craft he's an edgelord at best, an asshole at worst. Biopics are a genre I have a problem with, but not in absolute. There can be good biopics. They're just quite rare. The average biopic is just very mediocre. The thing is that this is based on a true story sort of shifts the bar of audience expectations. Suddenly you know that these aren't made-up events, so even the slightest, most apparently trite moment can be inspirational because, hey, look, someone actually did that and resisted the oppression / pursued their dreams / whatever. Except, I think biopics are fine overall. Some are great, some terrible, some have artistic merit, some are very by the numbers. I have a big bone to pick with how the performances are discussed come award season. Those performances are graded against a completely different rubric. Getting the mannerisms and quirks of a person takes precedence over working out how the character reacts to a scene, or figuring out how things stick with them as the movie progresses. With biopics, there's a correct way. My biggest problem with this genre is that there is a huge number of people who cannot differentiate between a biopic and a documentary, and we often hear / read people referencing fictions derived from the biopics when discussing the lives of these historic figures. Biopics are often careful to disclaim that they are based on a true story. They almost always take a lot of liberties with the story, with an aim to create a dramatically compelling narrative rather than to tell an accurate story. British singer Robbie Williams' biopic, Better Man, was actually really good. Williams is a motion-captured performance, chimpanzee in the film. Covers abortion, drug addiction, mental health struggles, infidelity, daddy issues, and so on. Also has big dance numbers like a classic Hollywood musical. By far one of the most original and creative biopic movies in recent years. Biopics about recently deceased celebrities, musicians especially, are generally subject to a lot of whitewashing of the subject person. The estates in charge of licensing the deceased musician's musical catalog are financially incentivized to ensure the film paints the subject in a mostly positive light so that they can make more money off the publicity generated from the movie. If the producers of the film aren't interested in making that movie, they don't own the rights to the music and no on. I think that's just Tarantino being a self-absorbed jackass. I've seen great biopics like Lawrence of Arabia, Raging Bull, and 12 Years a Slave. It depends on how they make it work. Most great biopics I've seen so far tend to tackle things like the human condition, character development, or the subject's evolving psyche and how it relates to the audience. It doesn't need to be a snapshot of the real figure's life, but their documented personality and motivations can be imbued with myth to create.